Hi, I'm Lee, and today I'm going to show you how I knit this little Palestinian flag patch, and the pattern is called Free Free, and it is actually an any gauge, any size pattern. You can make it as big as you want. If you want to make the little patch size, you kind of need to use fingering weight to get it small enough, but if you're making a bigger one, then you can use it any weight, make a bulky weight one, whatever you want. You just need these 4 colors, and the pattern is free. You can find the pattern PDF in all the regular places. There's also a zine version of the pattern that looks like this that you can print out. There's a printable file on my free Patreon. All you have to do is join the free Patreon, and you can download that file. There's also a screen reading regular PDF version of this file, but you can make a little booklet, and it has all the steps, everything you need, and illustrations and diagrams, schematics, everything. So everything you see in this video, you don't need to take notes or anything, just look at the free pattern, but this will show you a visual of how it all works. So you need the 4 colors, you need a locking stitch marker, and needles to match your yarn. You don't have to do a gauge swatch or anything, just get needles that'll be a good fit for the yarn that you're using. And every stripe starts the same way. You do each stripe 1 color at a time because it's modular, so you don't do any intarsia, no seaming or anything. You start with the green stripe and you cast on 2 stitches and you knit front, back, front, double increase, and knit the last stitch. And you're starting every stripe at the corner because they're all knit on the bias, or the middle is a chevron, so it's like a double bias. But they're all at an angle to get the shaping. So you always start at a corner and then you increase out. This is the right side row. You always slip the first and last stitches of every right side row. They're all the same. The right side rows are always the same. And you are increasing knit front back the first stitch and knit front back the second to last stitch every row as you increase out until you get to your stripe height or stripe stitch count number. If you're making a bigger flag, then you'll keep going until you measure the side and it measures the height that you want, which is all in the pattern explained. But in this case, because I want to knit a little patch size flag, I want to use the smallest stitch count possible, which is 8 stitches, which I'm at right now. So I'm increasing until I get to 8 stitches, and then I'm not going to measure. You can see here it's a little bit too little to really measure anyway, because I'm making a little tiny one. You can't really measure the height. So I'm just getting up to that 8 stitch count, and then I'm switching to the like stripe repeat pattern, which is on the bias. So I continue knit front back that first stitch, but now because I'm knitting on the bias, you increase at the beginning and you decrease at the end, and then that's how you always end up with the same stitch count. So I'm going to knit 2 together these last 2 stitches at the end. So increase the beginning and decrease at the end, and then I have my bias stripe established. And I'm going to keep doing that for a little bit longer until I have a little bit of a strip like that. And I have the locking stitch marker on there just to mark what the right side is. So I always know what the right side is because they kind of look the same. So now I have enough that I can measure that stripe height that I have. And I measured it, and it's 7/8 of an inch. So a little bit less than an inch, which makes my total flag height 2 5/8 inches. And the super easy pattern math tells me that that means my flag width should be 3.9 inches, or I just kind of rounded up to 4 inches. So approximately 4 inches. I kept knitting that stripe pattern until it measures approximately 4 inches, and that will give me a good flag dimension. So this doesn't have to be super precise. If it's a little short, your flag will just be a little bit less wide, or if it's a little long, it'll be wider. It's not a big deal for it to be super exact. But once you reach that width, then you just put those stitches on hold like I just did right now, and then you start your second stripe with the white yarn, and you start them all the same way, cast on 2, knit front, back, front. You're increasing out for the corner, but this is just the top corner, which is just half of the middle stripe. So you're only going up to half of your stitch count of your first stripe, which in my case was the smallest possible stitch count, 8 stitches, which means my half of that is only 4 stitches. So I just did a tiny, tiny little corner on the top corner, and I'm doing the bottom corner. Start the same way on the needle next to the top corners. They're just next to each other in the needle. And of course, if you're knitting a bigger flag, these top corner, bottom corner are going to be more substantial. You can see a picture of that in the pattern. But in this case, they're just these little tiny nubs of stitches. And now I am ready to start joining the middle stripe to the bottom stripe. So you're going to do that on the selvage stitches. And you look at the selvage stitches and you can see one of them kind of wraps around the corner. It like comes up from the side up to the top. Now that is not the one you want to go into. You want to go into the one that's all the way on the top. So the first stitch that's fully all the way on the top that doesn't wrap around the corner. You purl into it and then you pass the slip stitch over, and now they are joined modularly, and you're going to join the middle to the bottom stripe the whole way across. And then later on, you'll join the top stripe to the middle stripe the same way, and then everything will be joined as you knit. And you slip that first stitch and knit front back. And then this is going to be on the chevron shape. So what you do is knit to the last one of that little first section, and then you knit 2 together with the 2 different sections, the top stripe, bottom stripe. Corner, the top corner, bottom corner. Knit those 2 together and then knit front back at the end. And now you are kind of established with your middle stripe. Now your middle stripe is going to be 1 stitch more than your bottom stripe was. So 9 stitches in this case. So there's 4 on either side with the 1 middle stitch. And it's suggested that you take a locking stitch marker and mark that middle stitch just to keep track, so you always know what the middle stitch is, because you're going to be doing a centered decrease at the middle across to make that chevron. So right now it's kind of hanging on the bottom, but you can move it up as you go. And with the 9 stitches, it's pretty easy to just look and see what the middle stitch is. So it's up to you if you want to use the stitch marker, but if you're knitting a bigger flag, obviously there's more stitches. Okay, so now I got to where I join it again. So purl into the next selvage stitch, just like that, and then pass the slip stitch over, and you're just always going to do that. Just purl into the next selvage stitch, just across the whole top. It's pretty easy to see those selvage stitches there. Just purl into each one as you go, and you'll join as you go. And then you always increase at the beginning and the end, and then decrease in the middle. But now we're going to start the centered double decrease pattern, which centered double decrease, you stop 1 stitch before the middle, slip 2 as if to knit 2 together. So slip them together knitwise, and then knit 1, and then pass both of the 2 slip stitches over. And then you have decrease 2 with the middle stitch centered, and then knit front back at the other end again. So you're always increasing at the beginning and decreasing in the middle to make the chevron shape. And you can move that marker up. You don't have to move it up every single row. You can move it up every inch or so, or just to you're just using the marker as to know what the middle stitch is as you go up. So whatever your preference is, you can also kind of read your knitting to see what the middle stitch is if you prefer, whatever your preference is. So you're going to keep on doing that same 2 rows with the chevron shaping all the way to the end, and we have 1 more selvage stitch to go. So we're just going to knit 1 more right side row, always the same, slip the first stitch, slip the last stitch, and then join it. And the last selvage stitch is not the stitch that's held on the stitch holder. It's the stitch right below the held stitch. And you just do normal row with the center double decrease in the middle there. Increase both ends. And that's your final row. So then you break the yarn and put that on hold, and you can just use whatever kind of holder. I used a regular stitch holder for the first one. This time I'm using yarn to put the stitches on hold to just show you that option. So you can hold your stitches However you prefer. If you're making a little tiny patch flag like this, you can even use like safety pins or paper clips to hold them. So whatever works for you to hold your stitches for later. So they're ready for you later. And then you start the top stripe with the black yarn. So same, cast on 2, increase up. So the top stripe is started the same as the bottom stripe, where it's back to like a normal bias, no more chevron. And you're going to increase all the way up to the total stitch count, which in my case was 8 stitches. So exactly the same as the bottom. But then you're going to do 1 bias row, which starts with a knit 2 together right there, and then ends with the knit front back. So you're switching the bias direction. So it starts the same as the bottom, but then once you get to the stripe pattern, it's flipped. So you decrease at the beginning, increase at the end. And you do 1 of those rows first before you join it. And this will make a clean edge. And then you join it the same as the first one, where you purl through the first fully top selvage stitch that does not wrap around the corner. And pass slip stitch over, and there you go. And now you're doing the same opposite bias. So knit 2 together at the beginning, and knit front back at the end. So this will be the same direction as kind of the second half of the chevron of the middle stripe. And you just keep purling into the selvage stitches across the top, the same as you did with the middle. And keep repeating those 2 rows back to just a simple bias. There it's established. There we're going. We're doing the pattern. And we're just going to keep on doing that. You can see that little triangle shape starting to form. Until we get to the end. And then we have 1 more row. I'm going to do the last selvage stitch, which is not the held stitch. It's the stitch right below the held stitch. Purl through that. And that's the final row. And now you don't need to put these stitches on hold because we're just going to start the triangle. So just break your black yarn and now get all those held stitches onto the needle because we're going to do the triangle across all the stitches. So transfer those held stitches to the needle. However you need to do that depending on how you held them. And there you go. So where the 2 colors meet, where the green and white meet and where the white and black meet, the stitches are going to be kind of like overlapping or like right next to each other, which is fine because you're going to knit them together. So you slip the first stitch, then start your red yarn, and then get up to where the 2 colors meet and knit those 2 together, knit together the white and black, and then knit up to the last white stitch and then knit together the green and white. So you're decreasing 2 stitches. So your total stitch count now is going to be, the number of stitches you had in all 3 stripes minus 2 because you decreased those 2. And now we're going to start the shaping of the triangle. So you're using that same marker, the same middle stitch that you used in the middle stripe, because that same middle stitch is going to continue being the middle stitch that'll continue being center double decreased for the triangle. So you start with a knit 2 together at the edge, and then you knit to 1 stitch before the center, and then you center double decrease, just the same as you did with that middle stripe. Center double decrease the middle stitch, and then knit to the last 2 stitches, and then SSK decrease. So you're decreasing 4 stitches on every wrong side row. So you're going to decrease fast. Especially if you're doing a little tiny patch flag like this. If you're doing a bigger flag, it won't be quite as fast. But you're always decreasing it at the beginning and the middle and the end for 4 total decreases every wrong side row. And keep doing that as you go in, 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 in. It doesn't quite look like a triangle when it's on the needles, but when it's all done, it will become a triangle. So the final decrease row, you're not going to have any stitches in between the decreases. So you'll just knit 2 together, center double decrease, SSK in a row with no stitches in between. Then you have 3, and then you do 1 final center double decrease on the right side row. And that is that. And then cut your yarn, pull it through, and you're done. And you got your triangle. And then you can kind of stretch it and see. So this is obviously unblocked with all the ends. You can weave in some of those ends as you knit. Basically, the middle ones you can weave in as you knit the first row of the triangle if you want to, if that's something you like to do. But I just wove them all in later. And now they're all woven in, and it's still unblocked. And you can see how it already looks like a pretty good rectangle even before it's blocked. But here it is blocked. So now it's all blocked, ready to be sewn onto something. And of course, if you're using it as a patch, when you sew it onto something, you can straighten it all out and everything. So blocking isn't even that important. And these are all blocked, and the edges are like a tiny bit wonky, but depending on what you're using them for, you can straighten them out. And that is that. Happy knitting!